Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from West Virginia. Let's get into it. Story 1. Moundsville, West Virginia. Back in the first week of December 2021, I stopped at my ex-wife Lefty's house before heading home to Pennsylvania. She answered the door, then turned and went 3 or 4 steps up and sat down on the stairs leading upstairs. Entering the house, stairs on the right, a little dining-like room to the immediate left with a small kind of hallway leading to the kitchen in the back, with a TV room in between. In the TV room and said hallway is a door that leads to the basement. This hallway runs through the middle of the house. My back was to the front door, talking with her for roughly 5 minutes, when a shadow came from the TV kitchen area, swung a left and shot upstairs, avoiding hitting her on the steps. Now her and I have a 36-year friendship. We are divorced, yes, but have 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren together. We have had a handful of experiences in different homes we lived in, but this one was way different. I stepped back after the shadow darted upstairs and asked her, "Did you not just see that?" She said, "What, the shadow?" I said, "Yes, the shadow." She then says, "Good, I'm not losing my mind. Someone else sees it too." As I'm asking her how long this activity has been going on, off to my left in the front room, in the corner diagonal from the front inside corner nearest me, a shadow has started to form in the corner. I step forward towards the kitchen in the hallway, spin around with my back now towards the kitchen in a little room now on my right. Using the front window reflection, I tried to see this mass that was growing in the corner, not realizing at the time the reason I couldn't see anything was that the thing in the corner was taking the light out of the room. I leaned forward, looking to the right, and could not see the white walls in the corner behind the mass. It was extremely dark and made me very uncomfortable. Not many things scares, intimidates, or makes me uncomfortable in this life. This thing did all 3 fast. I asked her, does she feel the cold coming from that room? She just kinda said, "Yeah, it's always cold," and walks upstairs for a minute, leaving me in the foyer. I stepped forward towards the front door, turned and put my back against the door, looking into the room. Still dark, but getting lighter by the second. I asked what the F are you, and why are you here in the room, and got a bone-chilling cold draft hit me in the face. Then listened to the stairs as if something was walking up them. She comes down a minute or 2 later and heads into the kitchen. We are having some coffee, and you can hear something moving upstairs. I asked again, how long has this been going on at this level? This is intense. She says a couple years now. I've been gone working in Arizona, Florida, Louisiana, East Texas, and now I'm back up around our daughters. They be in West Virginia, me in Pennsylvania. I was shocked. I said, a couple of years. She said, yeah, but it has picked up over the last 6 months or so. I've been back to that house probably 15 times since then. Have not felt anything like that day. Side note, she's getting divorced and has been moving back into her house in Glendale, a little town next to Moundsville. Whatever that thing was, or is, has attached itself or part of itself to me, or at least that's what I think has happened. Abnormal things have been going on with me and around me. Co-workers watching and can't explain what's going on. They watch me struggle with something and not understand why it gave me such a fright. Things moved right after I set it down. Been different for sure. So yeah, that's one of my more recent encounters. At least with a solid black mass, it was kind of creepy how easygoing my ex was about it. Glad someone else had seen it, but was not really interested into why it was happening. Story 2. I've been reading other people's stories since I was around 12, and I finally decided to post a few of my own. I guess I should start with some introductions. You can call me Allie, although that's not my real name. I'm an empath, and I've had a lot of supernatural experiences, some of which I don't understand, as is the case with the one I'm about to share. I thought I should start with this one because A, I'm still confused, and B, it's the least personal. So this all started around 2013. At first I wasn't concerned because I'm very used to seeing shadow people, and that's all it looked like. Every night, as soon as I got in bed, it was there, standing in my doorway, watching me. It stood around 6 feet tall. It was darker than the darkest thing I've ever seen, if that makes sense. He didn't have a face, at least as far as I could tell, but somehow his expression felt angry. He didn't move much, except for occasionally stepping forward or back, and I may have been imagining things, but it looked like he was breathing. It made me uncomfortable, so I tried closing the door, even though it gets extremely hot in my room with the door closed. But when I turned around, he had moved across the room to stand in the corner by my closet, so I gave up and let him be. This went on for about a year, when I noticed things starting to change. For one thing, he moved more, a lot more. He would stand at his usual post for a while, and then he would walk closer until he was at the foot of my bed. Sometimes he would even put his hands on my bed, which, needless to say, nearly made me jump out of my bed. I would roll over to avoid looking at him. He would immediately run across the room and stand by the closet. Another thing that changed was this intense feeling of dread. It felt as if I was a mouse and he was a cat playing with his food. I couldn't sleep. It got to the point where I was paranoid during the day. Whether that was caused by him or the lack of sleep, I'm not sure. It was driving me crazy, and I wanted to know why. So I called my best friend over for a sleepover, let's call her Anne, and made a Ouija board. Yes, I know, I would be the first person to die in a horror movie. We decided to use her necklace as a planchette. Note, this necklace was heavy and flat, so there's no way for it to roll or lift up on its own. And we both held on to the end of the chain, leaving enough slack so as not to accidentally move it ourselves. 10, maybe 15 minutes of asking questions and nothing happened. I began to think maybe I was just being stupid and it really was just another shadow person. We gave up after another 5 minutes and let go of the chain. Not a minute later, after it began to fall off the stool we had placed the board on, but instead of hitting the ground, it slid itself back onto the board and started to spin. After what felt like hours, probably just a minute, of stunned silence, I couldn't think of anything to say but a joking, "Probably just the wind, haha." Anne wouldn't pick it up again after that, but I was determined to get an explanation from this thing if it killed me. It refused to speak coherently with the Ouija board, or maybe it couldn't, only saying a few random words including hex, stew, and toenail. Trying to think of ways those words could be put together in a sentence may just be more disturbing than the actual experience. But anyway, since I couldn't get it to work with the Ouija board, even when I put my hand on the pendant instead of the chain, I decided to try something like automatic writing instead. I turned off autocorrect and put the board over the keyboard on my computer, making one yes and =sign no. Then I closed my eyes, tied the chain around my hand without the pendant, and asked what he wanted. Whichever way I felt the end of the chain swing, I followed and typed a letter. Anne was watching curiously from the other side of the room, but not daring to come closer. When I opened my eyes, however, she asked what had been typed, and I told her it would be better if she read it herself, mostly because I didn't want to read it out loud. It flirted with her, calling her words I'd rather not repeat on here. It used her name. Angry, I asked it what it wanted from me. It responded by cussing me out and telling me to give the board to Anne. I compromised by asking her to read while I typed. I again closed my eyes and started typing, but promptly opened them when I heard my friend gasp. I read what was said, and my mouth fell open. He had threatened to decapitate her crush, by name, with a rusty fork. We had not talked about him once since she had been over, nor had his name ever been typed on that computer. Now thoroughly disturbed, I decided to ask one more question before saying goodbye. "What is your name?" He answered immediately, "Griffin Goodbaden." This answer was dripping with so much sarcasm I couldn't feel it. Griffin was the name of an imaginary foe I made up when I was little. I was He was cartoonish, 1 foot tall hunter that I would pretend had captured my stuffed animals and have my other toys rescue. But I decided not to push any further and said goodbye. Strange things happened for the next couple days, but he no longer stood by my bed at night. Anne said she saw a skull in the mirror that night when we went to bed. I looked and I did see a faint glowing spot, but not the skull. The next day after she left, a different necklace flew off my dresser and nearly hit me in the head. My closet door slammed on my leg. I finally learned a few cleansing rituals and used them. I even did an exorcism for good measure. Haven't really had any problems with him since, but the question still stands. Who or what is he? Was he a demon? Poltergeist? My house is new, but it is on top of an abandoned coal mine. Please tell me what you think. Story 3. I spent a good amount of my childhood living with my grandparents in a very rural part of West Virginia. Their house, well, the whole area where they lived, was haunted. There were many times that we'd hear footsteps in a room nobody was in at the time, paper towel rolls unraveling themselves, things that you normally associate with some place that's haunted. But honestly, especially when you're very young, you really don't think about it too much. It's just the way things are. But one night, at least for me, that all changed. I was probably about 6 or 7 at the time of this incident. My grandma had some relatives visiting, and I really never liked them. They were loud, obnoxious, and generally unpleasant to be around. I was a quiet kid and had decided that I needed to get away from all the ruckus going on in the living room, where my grandparents, my brothers, and their boorish relatives were talking. So I left the living room and walked into the kitchen. Let me explain the layout of the house briefly. My grandparents bought a 2-room house from my grandma's brother and added on as needed, so the layout wasn't what you'd call a traditional one. When you walked out of the living room, you entered the kitchen, which had a bedroom attached to it, and a door leading out to a small utility room used for storage. This room emptied out into the yard, where a small creek babbled away. There were other rooms, but for time's sake, I won't describe them. Anyway, I was going through the kitchen to the aforementioned bedroom. That's where my toys were. When I walked in, the first thing to draw my attention was the huge crystal cake plate sitting in the middle of my grandparents' big kitchen table. My grandma was quite the cook, and they had made this cake from scratch, and it was a beaut. Because of the fact that I was so young, the cake plate was so massive, and the table was so big, there was no way for me to move it. As I entered the room, suddenly the cake plate, without anyone touching it, picked itself up and hurled itself across the room. I stood there with a mixture of fear and awe. When my grandma came running in along with pretty much everybody else in the living room, she screamed, "Why? Why did you do that? I worked so hard to make that cake. Why did you throw it like that?" My grandpa walked in, looked at her, and said, "You know that boy didn't do that, and you know what did." I'll never forget the look of fear and sadness on her face, or how her face completely drained of color. I know it doesn't sound like much, but that was the day I woke up to the fact that there are things in that house that weren't of this world. I started really noticing what was going on. There are a lot more things about the house I could talk about, and hopefully this will give me a chance to by writing my stories. I started with this one because of how it woke me up with the strangest of things going on there. Story 4. I know what I want to say, just hard finding the words, so please bear with me if I ramble. But my mom's sister and brother and I just lost Dad on September 4th and was buried September 7th, Labor Day. He died of pneumonia. He died in West Virginia Veteran Hospital. He's buried in a private cemetery in Browntown, West Virginia. 1 month after his death, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 esophagus cancer that done spread to the liver and lungs. She had radiation and is now going through chemo. On one of her good days, she decided she was going to make the bed herself before my sister arrived to help her. She lives next trailer over. She's lost so much weight. 130 pounds is down to 78 pounds when she's 4 foot 9 inches. That when she flicked the blanket as best as she could, and off her wedding band came and she heard it go into the vent. So upset, she looked for tools to lift the vent, but my sister took all the tools out of the home just because my mom is hard-headed and will climb a ladder to fix something, and we don't want her hurt. She had a stroke in April 2015 and a heart attack in June 2015, and now walks with a cane, and she's diabetic. Last thing we need is her to fall. When Dad was around, he was 6 foot 6 inches, about 220 pounds, reached all the high stuff and was a mechanic before his heart attack in '99. Mom was so upset that when my sister did get there, she rushed to the kitchen to tell her all about it, and just stopped and went dead silent, and tears flooded her eyes. My sister didn't understand. As Mom reached past her and over the kitchen table, in the ashtray there laid Mom's wedding band. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.